podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today I have a very special Mother's Day episode. As you will notice, I'm putting out a bonus episode this week, especially for Mother's Day. I met a very lovely woman at a networking event who had just finished writing a book. And her book is kind of a collection of different stories, anecdotes, some fictions, mostly not, just different things that happened throughout her life. And she specifically told me I should, I told her I would be happy to buy a copy of her book because I like helping my friends out and I love reading, short stories. And she asked me specifically if I would read the very first story and let me know her thoughts. And I read it and I was absolutely blown away. This is just a beautiful story. So I'm going to read that and share it with you. The story is called The Woman and the Falcon, and it's from the book On Falcon Wings by Susan Morrell. And I'm going to put a link in the description on where you can get a copy of her book, but it's on Amazon. If you just search On Falcon Wings and Susan Morrell, it should come right up. But I highly recommend grabbing a copy of her book. I mean, full disclosure, I haven't read the entire book yet, but I have read a bit of it, and I like to support local writers too. So you'd be supporting a local writer here in Columbus, Ohio. Okay, so the story is called The Woman and the Falcon. And there's a beautiful prologue in it, but I'm going to let you read that on your own. But I will say that this story was dedicated lovingly to her mother, and she wrote this shortly after her mother's passing in 1991. So this is dedicated to her mother, Gloria Morrell. The Woman and the Falcon. Once upon a time, there was a woman who lived in a small cottage deep in a forest. The forest stood between a village and the rocky hills that loomed over it. One day, while returning from the village, the woman came upon a bird egg lying in a bed of leaves along the path. It must have fallen from a nest in a tree or a crevice in the rocks above, she thought. But miraculously, the egg had not been damaged when it landed in the leaves. So the woman gently picked up the egg and took it home with her. In a large basket, she made her own nest of twigs and leaves. She wrapped the egg in a small blanket and laid it in the nest. Then she put the basket on the hearth near the fire to keep the egg warm. Days and weeks went by. The woman worried that the egg would not hatch because of the fall it took, but one morning she was awakened to the sound of chirping coming from the basket. There, amidst the leaves and the twigs in the broken shell, was a scrawny baby peregrine falcon. Its bulging brown eyes looked up at her as it opened and closed its beak as if begging for food. She smiled and began to take care of her new guest. In the weeks that followed, the falcon grew from a bony fledgling to a strong bird. The woman saw that it was a girl falcon, and she grew to love her very much. But the woman knew she could not keep the falcon in her small cottage forever. As bad as the thought was of the falcon leaving, she knew the time had come for the bird to learn how to fly. On a sunny spring day, the woman walked to the top of a knoll in a meadow near her home. The falcon was perched on her arm. She stroked the bird as she said in a loving voice, "Don't worry, my little friend. You are a magnificent falcon, and it is in your nature to soar through the skies." The falcon looked at the woman, tilting her head to one side as if to say, "But I want to stay with you, woman. You have treated me so kindly, and I don't know what's up there in that great big sky. I'm afraid." Sensing the falcon's fear, the woman hugged her close for a moment. Then, holding the bird in both hands in one quick movement, she lifted it high above her head and released it to the skies. For a second or two, the falcon seemed to stop in midair. Then, as she began to tumble to the earth, she spread her wings out as far as she could and moved them up and down feverishly. At first, her clumsy efforts seemed to be in vain. But she kept on flapping until, wonder of wonders, she actually began to go up. Her wings slowed to a smooth rhythm as she felt the wind lifting her upwards, higher and higher. Oh, what a glorious feeling! In the meadow, the woman watched anxiously as the falcon faltered, then caught the wind and was flying. She felt a tug at her heart and her eyes filled with tears. She was so proud of the falcon. Yet part of her wished it was still a baby nestled in the basket by her fireplace. After a short time, the falcon grew tired. Looking down, she saw the small figure of the woman still standing on the knoll, and something deep inside the falcon stirred. A feeling of homesickness swept over her. She swooped downward. The smile on the woman's face as she flew to the outstretched arm filled the falcon with joy. Landing lightly, the falcon sighed contentedly as they headed back to the cottage. The years passed by, and the falcon ventured further and further from the meadow and the woods. She would be gone for days, even months, at a time as she discovered the wonderful world around her. Yet whenever she felt the urge, she could find her way back to that meadow, and waiting there for the falcon with arms reaching out and a smile that brightened her face was the woman. She was there when the falcon returned one autumn day with a male falcon she had come to love. She was there the following spring when the falcon and her mate returned with their 4 young children close behind. And she was there when the falcon returned alone and grieving. Her mate had been brought down by a hunter's arrow. No matter when the falcon came back to the meadow, the woman was there, waiting, ready to share in her adventures and simply love her. "How does she know when I'm coming home?" thought the bird in amazement each time she saw her there on the knoll. Little did she know that the woman visited the meadow every day in hopes of the falcon's return. Sometimes she would go at the crack of dawn, sometimes midday, sometimes at dusk. She had come to love and admire the falcon. She took pride in the fact that because of her care and her perseverance, this beautiful bird was alive. So she patiently waited, knowing that eventually her little friend would come visit her again. Then one spring morning, the falcon met with a surprise as she flew back over the meadow, and the woman was not there. The falcon looked around in confusion. "Am I in the wrong meadow?" she thought. No, this is the place. Then where is the woman?" The falcon flew to a branch high up in a nearby tree and decided to wait for the woman, who must have just been delayed in the village. All day the falcon waited, but the woman never appeared. By nightfall, the falcon was feeling empty inside. "Perhaps if I get something to eat, I'll feel better," she thought. So she dived down and caught a mouse in her talons and carried it back to her limb, but even after eating, the empty feeling remained. Just then an owl flew up and landed next to the falcon. "Hello, falcon. What brings you out so late at night?" asked the owl. "I'm waiting for my friend, the woman who lives in the cottage in the woods. She's always in that meadow to greet me when I come home, but today she was not there. I've been here in this tree all day, but she did not come. Perhaps she has forgotten about me?" the falcon answered sadly. "Oh ho, I know the woman you mean. She did not forget you, my friend. You see, she died last winter." The falcon stared at the owl in disbelief. "Died? But that cannot be. How could she die? Perhaps you are mistaken." "No, it was her. I remember being awakened early one morning by people in the village who had come to this meadow. Someone had found the woman lying dead at the top of the knoll, and they carried her away." On hearing that, the emptiness inside the falcon grew to such proportions she could not stand it. She plunged down toward the meadow and into the woods. She couldn't believe it. The woman was dead. She flapped her wings furiously. She found her way through the trees to the little cottage. She flew in through a broken window and landed in the middle of the room. "Woman!" she cried. "Woman, I am back! Where are you, woman?" Her screeches echoed through the cottage, but the woman did not answer. The falcon glanced around the room. The dust on the furniture and the cobwebs hanging from the rafters were evidence that no one had lived there for months. Then her eyes caught sight of something, there, by the hearth. She flitted closer and felt a lump in her throat at what she saw there. The basket with the leaves and the twigs and blanket, even the broken eggshell. Her nest. Her home. "Oh, woman, are you really gone? What will I do without you, woman? Who will I share my life with now? You were always there for me to come home to. You are my home. How could you leave without saying goodbye? Woman, mother, don't leave me." The falcon's screeches filled the cottage again. Suddenly she felt suffocated by the walls and the quiet. She flew frantically out the window and back into the night. The creatures of the forest froze at the sound of the tormented bird. Long into the night the falcon flew in circles over the meadow, around and around, her mind and heart in turmoil and despair. As the morning light slowly pushed away the evening shadows, the falcon ended her vigil over the meadow. She flew to a tree, let the fatigue sweep over her, and fell into a deep sleep. For days afterward, the falcon stayed close to the meadow by the woods. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Where would she go? What would she do? So much of what she did was because of the woman. The woman was encouraging and playful, comforting and caring, but most of all, she was loving. The falcon missed her terribly and could not imagine life without her. But a few days later, a restlessness began to stir in the falcon. She found herself longing for the open skies, for the feeling of freedom she got while soaring high above the earth for miles and miles, her feathers kissed by the wind that held her aloft. So it was that the falcon circled the meadow one last time that spring morning. She remembered another spring day. How long ago was it now? When the woman carried her to the knoll for the first time. She remembered how frightened she had been at the thought of flying, and then how exhilarated. Thank you, woman, for giving me my life. Thank you for setting me free to experience it fully, and thank you for always being there to share it with me. And with that, she spread her wings and headed up, up, up. Closing her eyes, the falcon let her instincts guide her into the clouds, oblivious to the world around her. Oh, little friend, isn't it magnificent up here? The falcon reeled at the sound of the voice and looked around her. What was that? It is I, my friend, said the voice again. But there was no other bird in sight, only... No, it could not be. The falcon stared incredulously at the apparition floating just ahead of her. It was the woman. How did... I must be dreaming. No, you are not dreaming. It is I, little friend, but not as you knew me before. The falcon was very confused. Are you a bird now? No, not a bird, laughed the woman. I'm a spirit now, and part of all living things that never dies. I cannot stay with you for long, though, for I must join the other spirits, but I wanted to thank you, too, for being a part of my life and giving it meaning. But I did nothing, said the falcon, except leave you all the time. I was selfish to expect you would always be waiting for me while I was off enjoying myself and seeing the world. Ah, but that is your nature, my friend. Your purpose as a falcon. And mine was to take care of you and encourage you. It was my choice, and it gave me immense pleasure. Then stay with me now, woman. Fly with me, and we will see the wonders of the universe side by side. I cannot stay, replied the woman, but I will always be with you. There is such a bond between us that will never die, that will never leave us. That bond is our love for one another. And like the wind that lifts you high and carries you far, this love will lift your spirits and carry me in your heart and mind forever. Oh, woman, I do love you so much, and I miss you terribly, but I'm afraid to be without you. If love is like the wind, can it hurt me like the wind that destroys the trees? Only the trees that resist the wind are broken by its force. Those that trust in the wind will bend with it and survive, the woman explained. It is the same with love, little friend. When you do not trust love, you become afraid. Then anger or self-pity, envy or hate take control of you, and you do get hurt. But love and fear cannot be inside you at the same time. When fears begin to rise, just turn to the love that is deep in your heart. Believe in its power, and it will keep you safe. The falcon thought and thought about this. Then a strange thing happened. Suddenly the falcon knew what the woman meant. It's like when I'm flying, she exclaimed. If I fly when I'm feeling depressed or angry or unsure of myself, I seem to be struggling against something, and it's so hard. But when I'm happy and joyful, the flying is effortless and smooth. With this insight, the falcon felt the love between her and the woman as if it had a life of its own, and a smile radiated across her face. When the woman saw that the falcon understood, she smiled too and said, "Now I must go, my friend. Think of me often and know that I'm with you always. I love you, falcon." And with that, the apparition began to fade. "And I love you, woman," the falcon whispered. Surprisingly, she did not feel sad seeing the woman go. Instead, she went on to live and love happily ever after. There you go. There's The Woman in the Falcon by Susan Morrell. And I would like to say a big thank you to Susan for allowing me to read this on my podcast. I had a feeling she'd say yes, and when I asked her, she was more than happy to oblige. So thank you so much, Susan. Again, the book is called On Falcon Wings by Susan Morrell, and it's spelled Morrell, and I will link it in the description so you can go get yourself a copy. And a personal note before I sign off, I had to pause recording that multiple times. I'm not sure exactly how long we're running right now in this episode, but I have been recording for well over a half hour because I had to stop and cry a few times. This was very beautifully written, and it definitely touched me very deeply. My husband lost his mother suddenly and unexpectedly the same year my brother passed away. So for him, my mother, all my friends who may not have their mother with them this year, please know that I will hold space for you. I will grieve with you. I will hold you in my heart today. I hope today you remember to be joyful. All right, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck.